Rajawat, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at localcircles.com. Also joining in the conversation this evening is Ajit, Ranade, the Chief Economist at the Aditya Birla Group. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on India Business Hour. Yatish, let me start with you. Because if you compare the performance and the survey that you conducted after the second year of Modi government vis-a-vis the third year, there isn't much change. I mean, the overall, in terms of the after second year, exceeded expectations was 18%, and at the end of third year was only 17%. Despite the fact that you had these two epochal moments, like, you had the surgical strike and you had demonetization. How does one read into these numbers? Yeah, go ahead.
So there is a change, okay? If you see the people who have responded that the government's performance is below expectation, it has actually gone up from 36% to 39%. That means more people are saying that the government is not meeting their expectation. Similarly, the euphoria, which was there is also kind of a little subdued. Last year, 18% people said that, the government is exceeding the expectation. This year, it has fallen to 17%. See, this 1% and 3% falls, you need to look at it carefully, because these show a decline in the way people are perceiving the government to perform. And there are 3 or 4 broad areas. One is employment. Second is safety and security of women. The third is cost of living and the prices of essential commodities. And the fourth is ease of doing business. These are 4 areas where the performance of the government has been below par. So this has affected the rating. But overall, because of the leadership of the Prime Minister, the government's rating remains well above 60%, which is remarkable for any government in the third year.
You're absolutely right, Yatish. While there is a decrease in the approval ratings of the government over the previous year, I think it's the Prime Minister's own individual ratings that perhaps have made an impact. But let me bring up those specific points, and Ajit, Ranade, come in on that. And this is the starkest result here. Have essential commodities, the cost of living, become cheaper? A whopping 66% say no, 28% say yes, 6% say no. This business of bringing down inflation has been one of the big milestone that this government has highlighted as an achievement. But yet, when you talk to the Aam Aadmi, as this poll clearly indicates, that doesn't seem to have translated into reality on the ground.
Well, first of all, Shireen, just to comment on the earlier numbers, I see a broad pattern of 2/3. So it's 44 roughly plus 18. So that's roughly 2/3 of the people are saying either it's the government is meeting expectation or exceeding expectations. So assuming that people already had high expectations, so meet expectations is a high bar to meet anyway. So if you're meeting and exceeding expectations, roughly 2/3 are keeping that impression. So I think that's pretty remarkable. As Yatish says, this is not the third year, it's the end of the third year. This is the end of the third year. So we are entering to the 4th year. On prices, this is notorious that whenever you ask any respondents, aap mehengai mehsoos kar rahe, do you feel inflation? And there's a tendency, inherent bias of people to say, yes, inflation is high. For example, the Reserve Bank of India's surveys repeatedly say inflationary expectations are about 12 to 15%. And so it actually reflects inflationary expectations and actual, because right now the vegetable and fruit inflation is negative. In fact, the current number for the last couple of months is negative. And it's still people are saying that this reflects more their expectations of the future rather than the current inflation.
Fair point that you make, Ajit. But I also want to pick up on one of the other aspects that this poll throws up. 3 years of the Modi government, which have been the most effective missions? Now, it's interesting, the DBT and the Pehel scheme right on top at 47%, the Jan Dhan Yojana coming in at number 2 at 29%, Swachh Bharat at 16%, and it's interesting, Make in India, number 4 with just about 8%. Ajit, Ranade, how do you comment on that?
That's pretty, I think, straightforward and easy to explain. Whichever mission has a very concrete, well-definable metric is of course doing well. So for example, Jan Dhan account, you can actually track how many accounts have been opened, how much are the transactions. Similarly, the PAHEL, the DBT accounts, the number of accounts have been identified and how much subsidy has flown is identified. Whereas for Swachh Bharat and especially Make in India, there is no well-defined metric. How do you, the metric was never defined. What does Make in India mean? Do we look at how much is produced in India, or, I mean, there was no metric. So that slogan needs to be translated into a very concrete, measurable metric. I think ease of doing business would have been a better way. I interpret Make in India as make India more competitive. So the more sharper you make the measurable metric, I think the better we'll be able to get a handle on that. Otherwise, it remains an empty slogan.
Okay, fair point. Yatish, let me ask you about the two other questions that you polled. Has harassment of individuals and businesses by tax officials reduced? It's a split verdict. Yes, say 36%. No, say 36%. And again, when you asked, has it become easier to do business? Split verdict again. Yes, saying 30%. No, saying 36%.
So you need to look at this from the last year survey. If you see, last year people were much more positive about ease of doing business. Last year they had said that yes, ease of business has improved. This year it has fallen.
What was that number? Again, what was that number, Yatish? If you remember that.
I'll just pull it up for you, but yeah, so it's
sure.
When the citizens were asked last year, the perception changed. 60% had said that doing business had become easier last year. So this has come down from 60% to almost 36%, which is almost half. So that means something primarily has changed, and what has changed is possibly the overzealousness of the tax authorities in pursuing their targets and their numbers. We've seen a fair amount of raids being done on individual businessmen and so on and so forth. And anytime a raid is done and it is publicized, the perception of fear increases. So it has a kind of a ballooning effect on the rest of the population, and that is why the figure about harassment of individual and business again is a split verdict, and it has again come down. I mean, it has actually harassment has actually gone up from last year.
Okay.
So these are two
Ajit, Ranade, how would you respond to that?
No,
I get your point, Yatish. Sure,
yeah,
and I want to get Ajit to respond to that, because if you look at this number, as Yatish was pointing out, if last year the number of respondents who said that they felt the ease of doing business has improved was 60%, this year it's down to 36%. And I also want to link that to some of the other questions that have been asked with respect to demonetization, etc., because that's going to be the next story that we move to. Has demonetization succeeded in cracking down on black money? Yes, say 51%. No, say 37%. Has corruption dropped due to demonetization? A majority, 47% say no, 37% say yes. Ajit.
So on ease of doing business, remember that a lot of the action actually happens at the state level. In fact, the government has introduced interstate competition for rank of ease of doing business. So for example, I think last year Maharashtra was #1, and now Telangana and Andhra Pradesh have gone up. So there's been some churn there. And so the respondents, I think, are reflecting the diversity of experience on ease of doing business across different states. I agree with Yatish that there is a concern about tax harassment, because in fact this was the party, BJP, when it was in opposition, they were the ones who coined the word tax terrorism. And then this year, when we have that clause in the finance bill, which the tribunals have been consolidated and there's more powers, and plus in the wake of demonetization and the new taxpayer identification, there's always that caution and there's always that apprehension that perhaps there should be a little more. The government has to be careful about not enhancing this impression of tax harassment going up. And as far as demonetization is concerned, I think there's a national, this is like a national conversation that's been going on for 6 months. There's a big narrative. And your numbers say 50-50, I think. There are, week after week, the national surveys showed that people were supporting it. In fact, in the earlier months, it was 85%.
And it didn't have any impact on the elections either. But yes, this does show that it's split even as far as the impact of demonetization is concerned. Two quick last questions that I want to put to both of you. Here's the good part. Has infra development taken place? And again, a whopping majority, 65% say yes, infra development has taken place. Do you believe unemployment rate is reduced? And a majority, that 63%, say that no, unemployment rate has not reduced. A quick comment from both you, Ajit and Yatish. Ajit, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think the very big concerns as we go into the fourth year of the government are in fact job creation, therefore unemployment, private sector investment spending, and credit offtake from the banking system. So, of course, what Yatish identified, the four areas that he mentioned in the beginning of this section, I fully support and understand those are the areas that the government must focus on, and unemployment and job creation, of course, is a top priority.
Yatish, final comments.
So you know, if you look at the unemployment perception last year, you know, 43% people had said that you know, unemployment rate has not reduced. This year it has jumped to 63%. So again, you know, if you look at mass reactions to figures of IT companies, you know, firing people, the e-commerce company firing people, you know, it kind of all this momentum kind of builds up, and it creates this perception which becomes stronger as it goes by, that all this growth that is happening is not creating jobs as much as they should.
The commensurate jobs.
We've seen it in the last 10 years also. You know, you know, the correlation between the GDP growth and the job growth has not been there. Now this has to be corrected. This you know, difference between the two has to be breached, and therefore,
well, you know,
more has to be done in terms of creating new industries, not just
you're right on that front. This is going to have to be
trying to build.
This is going to have to be a big area of focus, creating jobs, and as you pointed out, growth being commensurate with job creation. We've seen that decouple, and what we've also seen decouple is revenue growth for individual companies in the IT sector, for instance, as well as job growth. But Yatish, thanks very much for joining us. Ajit, Ranade, I'm going to ask you to hang in there because we've got another story that we want to get your comments on.